Okay, so welcome to this interview. I am sitting with Alex from Afghanistan. Uh, so we're going to be sort of figuring out, well, more asking a couple questions about what Afghanistan is like and what it was like to immigrate to America. So, uh, Alex, where are you? Let's see how to figure. I had like a plan for how I was going to start this, and
Mm.
that's not. It's kind of gone. Um, so I guess let's start with like just roughly, can you sort of introduce your life story? Like, um, maybe not where are you from Afghanistan, but
Yeah.
sort of roughly where it is, and then when you came here and
Mm.
what state you migrated to and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I was born in Afghanistan, as you mentioned, and I moved to Nebraska when I was just entering the sixth grade. I moved here by boat as a political refugee. I first traveled to areas around South Asia, such as India, which I then ended up, migrating there from here through various different political refugee systems.
Hmm.
And I'm currently attending school in Nebraska, and yeah, I think that's a basic introduction.
Cool. So you didn't just like migrate through like a visa or for some you actually came through the political refugee system.
Yes, that is true. So, big thing about the visas in Afghanistan is, I don't know if they talk about this in American media much. I haven't heard much about it, but um, coming here through direct means straight from Afghanistan to America is not only very rare but also very difficult. You have to reach a very strict criteria. You have to have various connections. You have to have a lot of money on you. You have to usually have very lots of military connections. Those connections and those parts of the criteria which my family did not meet. So what we did was we instead first legally immigrated to India, and through that we were able to network and make some connections where people would be willing to help us get to America.
Ah, okay. So that's really interesting. So
Mm.
went through you went through
Yeah.
India and did you were you a political refugee to India?
No, in India we have some family we were able to get work from, which is how we were able to get to India through a I forgot what the card is called
A
in
work
India,
visa,
but through
essentially.
yeah, work visa essentially. And through there we were able to meet more people and get some more materials that allow us to immigrate to America. So essentially, India was like the middleman to us, if that makes sense. So it's instead of a to B process, it's a A to B to C process.
Really? So that is really complicated. So it must have taken how long did this process take?
Let's see. I started around in American terms, let's say like third grade, maybe 6 or 7, and then I got here by sixth grade. So maybe like 5 or 6 years total, if we're counting all the steps. Moving to India, staying, working for a little bit, then moving to America.
Yeah, so that is a long process. Yeah, so
Hmm.
you started when you were six or so and you ended in
Yeah.
sixth grade is
Hmm.
I can't remember. But so that's
Yeah.
so yeah, you immigrated sort of over the course of elementary school and you started living in America at early middle school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's so Yeah, that's fascinating. So, I guess let's start with a couple questions about
Yeah.
what it's like in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So, I'm sort of spitballing.
All right.
I threw out three questions before this, so
Mm-hmm.
you know, actually hear the bell. So I guess my first question
Mm-hmm.
is that just um, what is so in America, we have a very, very strong image of what Afghanistan is like, and it's
Yeah.
probably not super accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But which parts, like, what would you say is what would you say is the American perspective on Afghanistan, and how would
Mm-hmm.
you say that that's inaccurate to what
Yeah.
Afghanistan's like?
So, one thing that I want to mention, before I do this question is when you say American perspective, I think that there are, traditionally two perspectives that people can hold. One is a more, looking at it through a humanist lens, and one is through a political lens. So, nationally speaking, I've met many Americans, who've studied about Afghanistan in school beyond, just the war and political context of it, and ask me questions about the food, or the clothing, you know, um, things of that nature, things that make up the basic part of our culture, or there's a geographical connection. I've had people ask me about, the minerals in Afghanistan, the mountains of Afghanistan, how Afghanistan is split up, things of that nature. And there's also people, who um their information about Afghanistan is mostly political. You get me? It's like, for example, you're gonna say, "Oh, that's where the Taliban is," or "Oh, that's where all those soldiers went and died for nothing," or someone might say, that's the country we liberated." So I think that when it comes to the American perspective, it's so broad and so different in what the concept around it is that I to the point where I think it's hard to create a general image of what Americans see, if that makes sense, because I don't know if I'm wording this right, but it's kind of, there's so many different perspectives based on different things that I could never say this is what America sees in general, because even if I said in general, it's going to be untrue. But if we're talking in a more political context, um, I think that people forget that, and this is beyond Afghanistan as well, in my opinion. People forget that these countries, Afghanistan, Somalia, uh, Palestine, Israel, these countries that are in, let's say difficult situations. Yes, it's true that we face a lot of hardship, but we also have, regular lives and the regular human experience, if that makes sense. Like we're still outside, playing football on the street. We're still outside, we're making friends. We have inside jokes other countries don't know about. We have slang that we use with each other. You know what I mean? So yes, we are in a war zone. That is completely true. We are in an economic struggle. That's completely true as well. But that's not the only thing that takes our lives. I don't want someone to look at me and see me as a victim of war. I want someone to look at me and see me as, Alex. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's I don't blame Americans for this though, because to be honest, the only person we have to blame is, the media for that. We wouldn't see, national media, highlighting a story of an, Afghan boy getting let's say for example, a medal at his school. You would see a story about, an Afghan boy getting his house bombed or drone strike, for example. And I'm not saying that the media is wrong for that either, because, you know, we are all one part of one big universe. So it's hard to, focus on those little details that make us human. But those little details I feel like are more common than, we are made to believe, or Americans are made to believe through the media. I don't want them to, think we are all just war. I have a lot of happy memories from Afghanistan. Yeah, I have, bad memories of the war, but I also, have memories of, sitting down with my family and, having a big dinner, or, um skipping school with my friends some days. You know what I mean? It's I think that's the biggest misconception that Americans forget, is that, we have the human experience too. It's a universal thing, if that makes sense. And I would say that for a lot of countries as well. Yes, it's true. These countries, definitely not in the same state as America in the sense of, what they struggle with, but there are things that every human, faces, that is, core to us as people, which I think is easy to ignore when we only focus on the, not big things, but the things that the media wants to focus on more. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So that sort of idea of, there's a war here, there's conflict, and that's the stuff we see, but there's also a
Yeah.
human element.
And that's not to say that we have to ignore it and say that the war occurring is not real, or it's not a significant occurrence. But I think that means that we shouldn't try to only focus on that in a sense. If that I think that we need to remember that for every video or picture of Afghanistan we see, there's a context we cannot see. If that
Mm.
makes sense. There's a part of it where only someone who lives through it will know. Just like how if someone were to, for example, take a snapshot of your life, it would be only one snapshot of a story a lot of people don't know. Are parts of a story that are very complex and personal to you, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. Absolutely. Like the whole principle of you're only yeah. So we people only see a snapshot of
Yeah,
Afghanistan, and they only see
yeah,
arguably the one that's the most like connected to them.
yeah,
Americans
yeah.
they think about Afghanistan as the war.
Yeah, but we are not just the war, you know what I mean? We are more than that. We are people just like, we are people, like we have experience that I'm sure many Americans connect to, but we also have experience, I'm sure that many Americans can't connect to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And so I guess to sort of get more into that, I guess the next thing I'd ask is, what if you could say, and obviously,
Yeah,
there's no easy to answer this
of
question,
course. Yeah.
but if you could say there's some aspect of your life in Afghanistan that you felt encapsulated what it was like growing up in Afghanistan,
Mm.
what would you say it is? Obviously, this might not be like something
Yeah,
every
man.
Afghani would point to, but
Yeah, man.
what do you feel is like the memory or the experience or the
Yeah, man.
concept that sort of feels you feel like
Um,
encapsulated growing up in Afghanistan?
um, you know, I think it's the chaos of it. I mean, when I say chaos, I mean like I know that if I go to sleep in America, or the place I'm in currently, Nebraska, if I wake up, you know, uh, things are gonna be the same, if that makes sense. There's not gonna be any sort of, significant event that's gonna, put me at risk or, put my family at risk or, I have to call someone and say, hey, are you okay? But in Afghanistan, I think that, with every good experience, there's an experience where um it kind of goes one on one against each other, if that makes sense. So you know I remember days in school. I can't relate to a specific memory, to be honest, but I remember days in school where it would be 7 a.m. I'm walking, to 2 p.m. I'm, for example, eating lunch with my friends, and then 2:15 p.m. we have to evacuate because there's a drone strike near us. You know
Mm.
what I mean? And that's the thing. It's even though we have those I could have as many of those good experiences as I want, but the thing is, unlike here in America, there's always this overarching, you know, doom that could come and get you, if that makes sense. It's not a consistent safety, or it's not a consistent feeling of, oh, I'm relaxing. I can relax for a long time. It's a feeling of you can relax, but you got to be ready for the next thing. You can't just be stagnant and expect it all to be good, because you know that no matter how comfortable you are, that can be taken away in a second. And I think that that does exist in America as well, but I don't think in the same immediate way, if that makes sense. I mean, let's look at America right now. I've been hearing stories about how the new middle class is 200,000 a year. Stories about how Americans who've been working, nine to five jobs for 40 hours a week, they miss 1 or 2 days. They're so paycheck to paycheck that now they lose their home. I think so. I think that lack of comfortability, it is universal, but I think what I think encapsulates Afghanistan with it is uh it's more immediate, and you're more used to it, if that makes sense. You become accustomed to it, accustomed to being ready to hide under the table if you hear a drone strike, or you become accustomed to putting your hands up if you see a soldier raid, or
Mm.
things of that nature. You become so if I was to say, yes, that would encapsulate my feeling, where I think it's I'm comfortable and I'm living, but I'm not too comfortable. You know what I mean? I'm ready for the next thing. There's always that overarching feeling that something bad is gonna happen.
So so that's really interesting. See, so there's sort of to that just to keep going off that, you'd
Yeah,
say there's sort of a psychological change you almost have to make as an
yeah,
Afghan, where
yeah.
you get used to the idea
I
of
mean, yeah,
chaos.
yeah. It's just nature. You're human. You want to survive, to survive, you have to be ready to adapt to your environment. And our environment over there is mixed with so many things. Robberies. Terrorists. Soldiers. So all these different factors. So you have to learn to become not only accustomed to that, but you also have to learn how you're going to challenge that if it comes to it. So it is definitely psychological, but I think it's psychological in the sense that it's our basic human survival instincts that we're going to do what we need to do to survive.
Mm.
I don't know how many I don't know how many Americans are, and I'm not saying this to put down any Americans. School shootings occur, of course, but I don't know how many Americans are um going to school and the first thing in their head is to get ready for that school shooting. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying there's so many immediate there's so many immediate factors in Afghanistan that the troubles you were facing was only meters away from you, a few meters away from you. There were days where I would see full blown shootouts before different groups of terrorists in our school, literally right outside the door. So that's like when it's that close to you, when it's that prevalent, you have to be prepared for it. So you're gonna do what you need to do to survive, and that's just you being human. That's just you evolutionary um in terms of evolution, being ready to survive and reproduce. For example.
No, that makes so. I I guess one thing I noticed is that you kind of pointed it out. There's almost a difference between like for Americans where there's almost would you say Americans are almost this is just me trying to put something
Yeah,
together.
yeah,
Would you say Americans are almost more scared than Afghans? Because it sounds like Afghans are almost desensitized to the fact
yeah,
that their lives are somewhat more chaotic and
yeah.
at risk.
I would say I wouldn't say they're more scared in the sense that they think. Hmm. One, I think it depends, on individual, obviously. But if I were to generalize it, I don't think Americans are more scared in the sense that um they are always fearful. I don't think it's more scared in the sense that you are fearful something bad will occur, but I think it's Americans have a harder time coping with it. We Afghans, we see it with our eyes. We go outside, we see the shootings. We go outside, we see the robberies. We hear phone calls from our families who are in drone strikes saying they need to leave immediately.
Mm.
But for Americans, I've met some Americans who, they'll live in a very upper class, rich neighborhood, and they're scared of getting their car robbed, and they say that's the reason they don't go outside that much. And it's, of course, I don't want to be the person that puts down anyone's fears
No,
because that's
absolutely.
hypocritical.
Sounds
But I think that with Americans, I think that since most of the especially I think suburban America too, for suburban America are parts of America where there's not that many issues. There's this tension that they get from you know consuming different anecdotes or consuming different videos, consuming different stories that keeps them on edge, and it's not really coming from personal experience. It's rather coming from a I've got to be prepared for this even though I don't know what it is. It's the fear of not knowing. It's the fear of walking towards the door and not knowing what's behind it, if that makes sense.
mm.
I think that uh like I said, I don't want to put no one's fear down. You get me, man. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
no.
don't want to do that. But at the same time, there is definitely you know, cases where I've seen them react to really small, events that are small compared to what I've seen in Afghanistan, like, and they react in a way that's 10 uh you know 10 times more paranoid, if that makes sense. I will see a drone strike and I won't bat an eye. I'll go do it, hide quickly. But I'll see some Americans, they see a robbery in their local downtown area, and then now they're going to Facebook, Instagram, they're saying, "I fear for my life. I don't know if I can go outside anymore. I don't know if you know what I mean."
Hmm.
And like I said, no hate to them. I just think that when you're not used to it, your reaction to seeing it for the first time becomes different.
It's a different culture,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you don't have to say right or wrong on that. It's just it's a different culture.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, we're desensitized to it,
Hmm.
like I mean, even living in America, I've seen some, crazy stuff here, but I don't really bat an eye. That's just because, I'm used to it. But the same person who is next to me witnessing it, they might be more fearful and they might, get more scared around it because they're not used to it.
There we go. Okay, so sort of to we've sort of I feel like we have come back to the media a lot and different
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
aspects of the media, which is
yeah,
fascinating to see how like on some level it seems like the media plays a big role in culture, and that's just true
yeah, yeah,
everywhere. So I guess sort of if just to put down a bedrock for
yeah.
everyone, um, weird question. What was media like in Afghanistan?
Mm,
What did you consume,
yeah.
and what was and do you think there was a different culture
Mm.
around media than there was in the United than there is in the US?
Um, so one thing I need to say when it comes to media is one, our access to media, just because of poverty levels and just because of, intentional withholding from the government, you know, we didn't always have phones where we could, look up, certain parts of the news. Some of us were rural, village people who only time we see a TV is when we walk past downtown Kabul, Um, so for one thing, our access to media is not like America. Like, right now you have a laptop. I know, there are many Afghans in my family who are, rural villagers. They don't have access, to that at all. So, when it comes to consuming news or consuming information, a lot of it is word of mouth. So if your family member that you trust or friend that you trust says something and they have access to media, you're going to believe it and you're going to share it around. And another thing about media is, see, propaganda will exist no matter you. I mean, it's a universal thing,
Mhm.
like propaganda is whether you go to, the UK, America, whether you, let's say you go outside the West, you go to China, India. Um, Propaganda is always going to be a thing, but with America compared to Afghanistan, I think you have ways of combating the propaganda in America, if that makes sense. With a few, let's say, for example, you see an article that is has a title that's very, false.
Mhm.
If you were to, look up the same subject on Google, and look through other articles, you could read enough of those articles to where you get an accurate sense or accurate portrayal of what is really occurring. You know what I mean? So there are ways of combating that propaganda. I'm not going to say that it's prevalent or it's perfect, and it's definitely difficult. I mean, I see things on my phone where I'm like reading the maybe for example an Instagram post, and then it's probably completely false in hindsight, but I believe it,
Mm.
and I need to step back and say, hey, let's look over this. But in Afghanistan, because we have so many limited sources of media, whether it's like news channels or blog posts, it's more difficult to combat the propaganda that is embedded onto us. So if the government, for example, let's look at Tolo News. So Tolo News was, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, by the way.
I'm sadly not, no.
No, no, that's completely fine. So I just want to, preface it. So Tolo News is
Sorry,
was
how is that pronounced? Just a
Tolo, Tolo, Tolo
Tolo.
News. If
Okay.
you look it up right now, you could probably see it. So Tolo News was one of the biggest broadcasting channels for America, not America, sorry, Afghanistan. So that's one of the biggest news channels in Afghanistan. It had channels segments in both Dari and Pashtun, both of our main languages, and um sorry, yeah, it had lots of different segments for different things. It was national news. Think of it as politics aside. Think of it as the CNN of Afghanistan, for example. It's a big source of news that a lot of people go to.
Mm.
Well, uh, when the Taliban took over, they actually were kidnapping and they were actually kidnapping and threatening members of Tolo News had they not shared if they were to share the wrongdoings of the Taliban or share the wrongdoings of Taliban affiliates or try to expose them in any way or try and we're basically essentially forcing them to share uh, you know good or positive news about the Taliban. you
Not
know.
even.
And
Yeah.
this is all confirmed. You know, you can look this up. There were, you know, news reporters saying, yeah, they sent me death threats. There were news reporters saying, yeah, they you know, there was actually a video I saw, I think 1 or 2 years back. There was a video of a news reporter with a gun to his head, you know, like, and they were all, you know, all the not, I don't know if they were Taliban, but they were definitely affiliates, you know, and they were gun to his head, you know, all laughing, you know, making fun of him and, you know, telling him that he needs to, you know, change, you know, basically forcing him to change what he's saying. And when that happens, we don't have a Fox News to go to. We don't have you know, a press TV to go to. We don't have a, you know, we don't have a MSNBC. We don't have local news. We don't have, you know, news. We do,
Since
but
there's less media,
yeah,
when that media gets taken over,
then
there's no
then
other.
it becomes issue. We do have more forms of media. I'm not saying, you know, Tolo News is the only source of news, but it's not as vast as America. So when our only source of information is withheld from us, then we begin believing those stories. I'm not gonna lie, I have, you know, family members that support the Taliban. Believe it or not, bro. I swear to God, you know, they support the Taliban. They think that when you tell them Taliban, they think of, you know, guys fighting off soldiers who are killing Afghan children and then donating to the poor. You know, that's what they think. Because if you were to look it up, that's what you would see. Or if you were to turn on your you know, TV, that's what you would see. I guess you could make some connections to America with, you know, for example, you know, modern Americans who think, you know, extremist parties such as, you know, extremist communism or extreme forms of Nazism, you know, how they support that because of the information they're provided. But at the same time, they have those other sources of information, you know, that they could use to combat that propaganda they are consuming, whether it's from, you know, the government or other, you know, parties. So, you know, in Afghanistan, it's like once it happens, if that makes sense. So once
There's
someone gets that good news about the Taliban, they're most likely not gonna read anything else about it. You know what I mean? Like, so it's more of like so if I were to summarize, I would say one, the poverty your average Afghan faces makes it difficult to consume news or media, and two, the lack of free information in Afghanistan. I'm not going to say that they can't get information from other countries, you know, for example, Indian news or, you know, Iranian news, which, yeah, both those aren't perfect either, but, you know, that they do have access to it geographically, you know. Um, but for a lot of Afghans, you know, they're like us where you're not going to take that effort, you know, you're going to take it as it is. And that's, like I said, that's the universal thing where it's like, you know, if you read a story on Instagram and you think it's fake, let's be honest, how many times would we rather just scroll past it instead of saying, hey, you know, maybe I should research this a little more? It's a human thing, you know, like
hmm
you move on with your day. But the thing is, when it's Afghanistan, you don't have that opportunity to combat it. That's what's dangerous, you know. Uh, and that's what I think. One of the biggest issues with it is, you know, if you lack that information, but also lack that effort, then, you know, what's left to do? It's kind of a dead end.
Yeah. So that is firstly that is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
So that's really interesting. But secondly, a few questions off of that. Hence why because it's it's fascinating.
yeah,
So sort of to just take a sort of little step
yeah.
in the to the side. So one thing that I found interesting is that you said like Tola News you
Yeah.
mentioned was like one of the big, probably one of the. Would you say it's like the largest, one of the largest in
I
Afghanistan?
couldn't say the largest, but it's definitely up.
So one thing I noticed is that like the way you described it. So I mean,
Yeah,
this might be wrong, but the way you described it sounded like Tolo News didn't have like a massive competitor. And when you compare that to like the United States,
yeah, yeah,
there's a bunch of media companies, but they are still competing with each other. You'll have Fox, CNN,
yeah,
NBC, and there's even more
yeah.
journals.
And you'll see them, you know, you'll see them throw shots at each other. You won't really see that, you know, in Afghanistan. Even the ones that are competitors, you know, it's not really like a my news source is better than you kind of thing, you know.
Mm,
It's just like we compete, we compete. You know,
okay.
you don't see them throwing shots. But that's not to say it doesn't occur. You know, that's not to say they won't call another news source fake news to prove that theirs is more true. But it's not really a culture war similar to America. You
Like
know,
in America, it's like
yeah,
if you CNN and Fox News, there's these
it's
like
a culture thing. Yeah, it's a
icons
culture.
of
Yeah,
ideology.
yeah.
It's culture, yeah.
It's a cultural war. You know, if I were to say here, I watch Fox News mostly, someone would get an idea of my political views, and if I were to say I watch CNN closely, people would get a different conclusion on what my political views are. Uh, but to be honest, it doesn't mean that I have any political leaning. Like maybe I like Fox News more because, for example, it's comes free with my cable plan, or maybe I watch CNN more because there's one specific segment I like. I mean, we have to remember most of Fox News and CNN. A lot of it is not political. I'm not going to say most of it, but a lot of it is not even political. A lot of it is just basic day to day news. But when we say we like CNN, or someone says they like Fox, or someone says they like MSNBC more, um, there's a political affiliation to it. Even to be honest, when there doesn't have to be one. So, you don't really see, you would never see that in Afghanistan. To be honest, I mean, there are probably lots of channels that, they support different, they have different views on the Taliban, or, different views on how the Afghan government was operating, that where they may disagree, or, throw some shots at another, Afghan source that disagrees with them, but it's not to the extent, and it's also not a cultural war like in America. Like if I said, for example, I was in Iran and I said I prefer um I prefer Press TV over Tolo, you know, or I prefer Tolo over Press TV, and they disagree with that, they're gonna have ideas on what my political backing is, but it's not gonna dominate what they think. It's not gonna be like a big cultural thing of I know this is what you think, or I know this is the kind of person you are. It's gonna be like okay, like just you shrug your shoulder and move on. It's not a big deal. But in America, I feel like it's definitely a big deal.
That's really
Even
interesting.
even things. Oh, sorry, I
No,
cut you off.
no,
I
no.
was gonna say I think it is a big. Even basic things like saying, basic things like saying I prefer CNN more. I prefer Fox more. Depending on the community you're in, or depending on where you are, um, you know, you could be outcasted. You could be ostracized. You know what I mean? Like I know, for example, the place I'm in right now, where I don't personally agree, but if someone were to say they were conservative, or not to say they're conservative, or say they had some sort of conservative leaning, they could lose their friends. They could lose potential relationships with forms of authority, like, so it does play a big role. And that's why even the little thing, like, support CNN over Fox News, or I support Fox News over CNN. It becomes a cultural thing where someone judges you based off that, and that can actually impact your life. But in Afghanistan, or in Iran, or in India, that's not really good. A big, or sorry, I shouldn't say India because I'm not sure about India, but I know in Iran, Afghanistan, that's not going to be a big thing. Like it might play a little role in like what people think of you, but it's not going to be. You're not going to wake up and lose your job over. Like
Hmm.
such as in some cases in America. I'm not going to say it's
Yeah,
you know
it varies,
it
but
it occurs, yeah, but you're not going to wake up and lose your job over it. You're not going to really lose a friend over it. It's not as big of a deal. Is what I'm trying to say.
so that's actually quite interesting. So to sort of come off of that,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people who know a bit more about Afghanistan in
yeah,
America, they tend to very quickly notice the whole fact that Afghanistan is this very ethnically diverse, very,
of
very
course, yeah,
diverse country.
yeah,
And Iran is the same way. It has a
yeah,
lot of has a lot of minority groups and
yeah,
internal. And so it's very interesting that when you compare the United States to Afghanistan, even though Afghanistan arguably has a more diverse
mm-hmm,
and more culturally divided culture, there's still a sense of, regardless of your ideology, you're still an Afghan.
mm-hmm,
And at least, well, actually, would you say
mm-hmm.
that?
That's the thing. I think that for a lot of modern Afghans, there's this or not just modern Afghans, a newer generation of Afghans, and Afghans who have been more out in the world, such as visited the West. That may be true, where there is a sense of Afghan unity, um where I'm Afghan, you're Afghan, we face the same struggle, we're brothers.
Mm,
But just like many other countries which are in this similar situation of Afghanistan, where it's very ethnically diverse, uh, there are some people that will find out you're a different ethnicity than them, and they're going to hate your guts. And that still occurs in these Western countries too, which is fascinating to me. You know, so I think that yes, there can be a sense of unity. I'm not gonna sit here and say every Afghan hates each other. That's not most of Afghans I meet. The first thing we ask each other is, "Are you Afghan?" We're not gonna ask, "Are you Uzbeki? Are you Tajikistani? Are you Pashtun?" First thing we're gonna ask is, "Are you Afghan?" And then kind of connect off that, especially for not people like me because I'm an immigrant, but for the first or second gen Afghans, who I don't know if I'm using first or second in right, but the ones who were born in America but come from a line of Americans. I mean, sorry, not Americans, Afghans, but they're more Americanized. It's not really present. Or for example, in Europe too, there's a lot more unity. But let's say if you're in internal Afghanistan, especially the areas where people are more confined to their one community, their one village, their one group of people, they might think that you're the devil and want to kill you. Like
Mm,
I've met, like me personally, I'm Pashtun. I've met, Tajiks who came to me, the second biggest group, who said, you're a terrorist, you wanna kill, our people, you wanna make everyone speak Pashtun. I've met, Pashtuns who look at every Tajik as, degenerate kafirs, infidels, who are going to, ruin Afghanistan. I've met, I've also met though, Afghans who are Pashtun and Tajiks, they're best friends, are Pashtuns and Tajiks who are married to each other, or things of that nature, or I've met, Hazaras who are Shias who are, going to the same mosque or masjid as Tajiks who are Sunni or Pashtuns who are Sunni, so I think that it differs level to level, but I think that the main thing is this ethnic divide, it's still more prevalent than we're made to believe in an American context. Like if you met the Afghan Americans, like you would not see them. Some of them will hold these radicalist beliefs regarding ethnicity or regarding religion or regarding political parties connected to those ethnicities, because it is good to remember that one part of the Taliban is that they are primarily ethnically Pashtun and want to Pashtunize a lot of Afghanistan, because they think that those are the true Afghans. Um, so some American Afghans or some European Afghans, will hold those same beliefs, but um, a lot of the time you'll see a big sense of unity because it's kind of a us versus the world thing. A lot of the Afghans, especially in Europe and America, since they have less time to worry about, dodging bombings or, dodging shootings, they're going to be more focused on who am I as a person, who am I as an identity, who am I politically. So, that they consider that more, they ponder that more. And that leads them to kind of saying, um, I want to stick to my people because we face the same struggle, But your rural Afghan, your rural Pashtun Afghan who's only been around other Pashtuns, has never, went outside of his little village, you know, if he sees a Tajik, he's gonna probably, hold those beliefs just because that's, what he was around. I'm not gonna say that's okay because I'm not gonna say it's okay to think that way, but it's just like, in, I'm not gonna say it's just like, but it's similar to, in rural America where, you know, if all your life, you've been around conservative people, you've been around people who are, very religious, and then you meet a liberal, you might have different beliefs on them. Or for example, if you lived in a very liberal area, around liberals your whole life, and then your first time meeting a conservative, you might hold beliefs about what they're like too. So I think that the more modern Afghans and the younger generation of Afghans, I think that they've kind of set aside these ethnic tension and ethnic divides and said we have common enemies and we have commonalities in culture, we have to come together. And I think that the Taliban taking over Afghanistan has definitely, the recent takeover in 2021 has definitely played a role in that, because now they're saying we have to come together, we have an out common enemy, you know uh so yeah, I do think that there is some unity between Afghans. I know that in America it's very we're very connected. if you know one Afghan, you know 200 more of them just through that one Afghan, you know, and you're all friends, you know. But in Afghanistan, it's not really like that. So I think it all comes down to, you know, where you are and who you meet. You know.
That's really so that yeah, that's so you'd say that to sort of so that was obviously there's a lot there, but
Yeah.
to sort of get at the core of that, you'd say that there's this strong sense of Afghan identity, especially
Yeah.
in younger Afghans. And
Younger Afghans and younger Afghans who were born in Europe and America, there definitely is because, you know, they were disenfranchised from their original homeland and and original culture, so they kind of, you know, bond together to strengthen that, you know, what they feel like they lost by not being born in their homeland.
so in that case, to sort of so would you say that there's a what would you say the young Afghans in Afghanistan, at least when you were
Mm.
there, what would you say their perspective is?
Um. Well, just like a lot of other young people, you know, they don't have as much responsibility. You know, they don't have bills or, you know. I'm not gonna say all of them don't, because I know, for example, I was working, you know, when I was young because I was trying to help support my family. But a lot of the young Afghans, you know, they're more rebellious, you know, especially with social media, the free flow of you know, information for the young Afghans who do have it. They, you know, yearn for a more, you know, liberal and democratic society. You know, they yearn to, you know, challenge the you know, ideas and beliefs of the previous generations before them, which they think are wrong. Um, so their life is, you know, it's a big struggle, you know, because the older ones are the ones who face reality at a young age, you know, such as myself. You know, I'm kind of indifferent to it now. You know, I'm like you said, I'm desensitized, but them, you know, they challenge it in the small ways they can. You know, they maybe, you know, it's going to a party and drinking. You know, maybe it's you know, maybe it's going on social media, making a fake account and posting about how much you hate the Taliban. You know, maybe it's you know, maybe it's them immigrating out of Afghanistan through their own independent means. You know, I've met Afghans who, you know, 21, 22, some of them, you know, 16, 17, moved to America all by themselves, you know, just because they wanted a better life, you know. So it's you know, it is a struggle for them, you know, and I understand why, especially if you were born in the not liberal and democratic areas of Afghanistan, but the more liberal and democratic areas of Afghanistan, if that makes sense, you know.
Yeah, that
The ones
there's
where there are glimpses of, you know, glimpses of what life could be like if these systems are in place. You know, so they yearn to, you know, fulfill that need of, you know, a society that cares about them, a society they can care about. So, you know, they are struggling, you know. They want to find something that will satisfy them, you know, and it's hard to find in Afghanistan, to be honest. uh so they are struggling, especially the ones who, you know, don't really have that option of leaving, or, you know, going out and partying, you know, stuff of that sense, because they have to, you know, become accustomed to that life for one reason or another, you know. So it is definitely a struggle, but it's also, you know, they are motivated, you know, they are motivated, and they are willing to fight for, you know, a society that they, you know, yearn to see. I mean, look at the young Afghan girls who, you know, some of them 10, 11 years old, you know, Taliban said you can't come to school. They themselves are what they are protesting the Taliban. You know, these are 10, 11-year-old girls going against, you know, 40, 50-year-old guys with guns and saying, I don't care what you think, you know. I know this is right for me. I know this is right for my country and my people. I'm going to go against you, you know. So it is a struggle, but it's not one where they put their some of them do put their head down in defeat and accept it, you know, but a lot of them are willing to die fighting, you know, for what they believe.
wow, that's just firstly that's just really powerful, but
Yeah,
secondly that is
yeah.
really interesting. So there's a lot of Afghan youths who really are like, I'm gonna fight for my,
Yeah,
and I think you can really see that in a lot of countries. It
yeah.
really is.
I think you can see it in America too, you
Yeah,
know.
there's a lot of that sort of sense of the youth are the ones who can and will push.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing that really gets at the idea of, because I imagine when a lot of people think of Afghanistan, they don't really think of resistance. They sort of
Yeah.
I as an American, as someone who's grown up my
Mm,
entire life in America, I feel like on some level there's this idea of the Afghan people being very passive almost.
mm,
It's like there's this sense that they're just the people in those villages and
mm,
they're not really
yeah,
it's almost like Afghans themselves are barely part of Afghanistan's
yeah,
story and
yeah,
I mean obviously that
yeah,
was false, but you're really putting that
yeah.
into perspective.
And can I comment on what you said
Oh,
about Irene being
absolutely.
passive? So, I mean, by the logic of, I'm not saying you, some Americans who think that way, wouldn't, wouldn't most Americans throughout all of history have been passive,
Mhm.
Like, think about the Americans, during the transatlantic slave trade, think about the Americans, during the Civil War, think about the, Americans, who saw the racism against Irish American immigrants or Italian American immigrants, that's just a historical thing, where throughout all of history, there's a group that's fighting it, and there's a group that is accepting it, and there's a group that is for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Very simplified, but
No, that's
yeah,
absolutely. There's always that
yeah.
that
And yeah, and what group makes
kind of
up
gradient.
yeah,
Yeah.
what group has the most people? It's the side of people that go on with the small parts of their life, focusing on their mortgage, focusing on how they're going to get food on the table, yes, it's true that maybe there are a lot of Afghans who could do more, but they don't. But I mean, is it really different to anyone else in the world? To be honest, I mean, like you know, it, I mean, it's easy for us to say if I was in this situation, I would do this, I would fight this. If I was living during this time, I would be for this group. It's easy to say that, but some people just as humans, we are more we more are like I'm just gonna stay. We are more inclined to be like I'm just gonna stay on my road and do what I need to do.
And that gets to the desensitization you were talking about
Yeah,
earlier. There's
yeah,
that inherent truth of
yeah,
psychology of you've got to keep living, you've
yeah,
got to
yeah.
keep
It's not.
going. And if
Yeah,
that means dealing with something that Americans would see as horrible, it
yeah.
is what it
Because
is.
think about it, to us, it's an inconvenience.
Hmm.
If I'm not trying to target you. I'm saying like if I put you, in my school where I saw, drone strikes, some of them, right like meters away from us, um I'm sure your reaction and your anger and your sadness towards it would be different than mine. You know what I mean? Because to me, that's just a normal Tuesday. To you, that could be a life changing thing. You know what I mean? So, so for a lot of Americans, that I hear Americans say, "How could you deal with this?" And it's like, well, we've dealt with it our whole lives. Of course, they're gonna deal with it. Like if you've dealt with drone strikes your whole life, you're still gonna wake up and go to work. You're gonna say, okay, that sucks, but I've got to put food on the table for my kid. And that's the thing when Americans say, oh, why are Afghans not fighting? Why are they passive? Well, for one, a lot of Afghans are fighting. That's the first thing. I don't even need to say that. I mean, you can. There are videos, photos, stories of Afghans who have taken it upon themselves are grouped together to say, I don't like this, I want change. But secondly, that's kind of victim blaming to say, to blame them for being passive. I mean, I'm not gonna say that they can't do more, but uh, why would they want to if they feel if they feel as if they have if they want to focus on the things more significant to their personal lives, you know what I mean? it's it's like um it's like asking an American why they aren't and I hate using the school shooting example because I know it's overused, but it's like asking an American why aren't you going outside every day protesting school shootings. Well, I mean, we have Americans that they're living paycheck to paycheck. They're trying to maybe they have a personal relationship issue. Maybe they are having issues with their jobs where the last thing on their mind is focusing on this thing. It's similar with Afghans. The the last thing on our mind is trying to change these things because we're just trying to just like Americans we're just trying to go day by day. That's just life. So I think that it is unfair to hold Afghans to a standard where we blame them because they are passive. Because let's be honest, in all of history, every country, there are groups which would be considered passive to things that need change but they aren't pursuing. And judging them and shaming them because they are average everyday people that don't want to participate in that change is not the way to go about it, in my personal opinion.
And you can see that perspective everywhere. I know there's been this big debate about, like, in Russia, for example,
Yeah,
like with the war in Ukraine.
yeah,
I don't support the war in
of
Ukraine,
course, yeah,
and I think most people in America
yeah,
don't.
yeah.
But there, you see that perspective of why aren't Russians always doing
Yeah.
things about it? And it's like,
Because your average Russian isn't even, probably your average Russian probably isn't, experiencing big immediate effects of the war. They're probably, feeling the effects, but they still have, main priorities, that are more related to their personal lives outside of the government and political landscape. You know what I mean? And regarding your example, I mean, like, could you, for example, say that Ukrainians that don't want to pick up a gun and fight Russia, are they to blame for the war? Are they being too passive? Like, I mean, where do we draw the line on it? I mean, where's the line between saying a group is too passive and a group is a group is too passive, and it being victim blaming? Because I think it's a very I think that we've fallen into the line where we're starting to victim blame.
mm,
Um, if Ukrainian, maybe he's a young male, maybe he's a young woman, maybe he's an old male, maybe he's a young woman, doesn't want to join the war effort, why should they be blamed? Why not, blame the group that's actually doing it? You can say, oh, well, you can blame both simultaneously, but to be honest, most of the people who I've seen throw out this point of Afghans being passive, it's not a two-sided thing.
mm.
They say, oh, look at how much, support the Afghans have received and they couldn't fight the Taliban. They're passive, they let it happen. Where it's like, I mean, who are you really trying to blame here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's yeah, absolutely, and it's great to have that sort of, because that there's a debate about this that goes on, but so
Yeah,
often it's a debate where the
yeah,
people fighting it are people who've never had it been in the
yeah,
scenario. So
yeah.
it's really is good
And
to have
yeah,
that.
and if you really think about it, like I explained, people are in this scenario every day too. If you really, I mean, no matter where you are, like in America, like I'm not gonna, blame an American who doesn't want to, protest, uh protest people in government that are insider trading. I'm not gonna, blame them for the insider trading. I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna say you're being too passive towards insider trading, because what good does that do really? And I mean, not only what good does it do, how can you blame them for that? You know what I mean? Like, you can say every group has been passive about bad things that have happened to them throughout all of history, but that doesn't mean it's a practical, way of going about exposing the issues firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. So just we'll probably come back to Afghanistan and what it was like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
growing up in
sure. Yeah,
Afghanistan, but
sure.
I want to sort of pivot away for a second and
Hmm.
talk more about what it was like as an Afghan coming to America. And so the first thing I want to ask about is, so we're currently within Ramadan, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So my first question is, do you practice
Oh
Islam?
no, I'm not practicing.
Okay, so you're non-practicing. Do you, I suppose I guess I'd ask what has been your relationship with Islam being in America, which is not a majority
Mm.
Muslim community, and
Being in America.
becoming either
Yeah.
were you born to a non-practicing family,
Oh no, I
or
was born practicing, but it's my personal decision, to not be
so
practicing. My
not
personal
to
faith.
I don't want to
Yeah.
sort of get too into your
Yeah, man.
personal spiritual journey, but
Yeah.
like what has been your relationship with Islam, and specifically Islam in America?
My relationship with Islam, to be honest, I've had a lot of experiences in my life, especially surrounding war, where it's I don't really have faith in many things. I don't really have faith in our governments. I don't have faith in the systems we put in place. I don't have faith in people. So it's just hard for me to have faith that and think that someone's looking over me or someone's looking over people and getting ready to punish these people when I haven't seen it firsthand. You know what I mean? Um, because then I have to say it's like saying why don't you have faith in karma? I mean, there are lots of people doing bad things right now. Where's their karma? You know what I mean? how can I say karma's real if I'm seeing, this this member of the Taliban holding the biggest position of government when he killed who even knows how many people, he's killed, or how many people he's injured, or how many, deaths he's allowed to occur. It's hard for me to have, have faith when that's the things I kind of saw. Or it's hard to me to have for me to have faith when every day, I'm trying to dodge drone strikes or trying to dodge bullets. It becomes a thing of, I don't think death is anything, and I also don't think life is anything. You know what I mean? I think
Makes
I'm kind of an absurdist, I guess you could say. I
can
kind of,
can
this is
you
really rare. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
elaborate more on that actually? Because that's
I think that, I've read some of Albert Camus' work, and I think that when it comes to life, I think that, things happen where we want to make connections or understand them or get context, but no amount of that can make it make sense.
yeah,
That's how I kind of feel about my life. It doesn't make sense why I was born in Afghanistan. I had these conditions on me. It doesn't make, sense, or no, there's no logical sense behind, supporting the Taliban, but it still happens. There's no logical sense behind someone, beheading a child, but it still happens. That's kind of how I feel. I think that that's kind of why, I don't really have faith in a higher being. I think that it's kind of a cope in a way, like we want to say, oh, this guy is here to protect us, you know, or this thing is here to protect us, because it's easier than just admitting that sometimes good things happen, bad things happen, and it's not in your hands.
makes sense. Yeah. So I suppose to get more into that, so that's very interesting to sort of understand that
Mm,
spirituality and definitely to see how that's been influenced by
yeah,
your growing up and your life. But the other aspect of religion that's always interesting is the
yeah.
communities that developed around it. And so, how would you say? I suppose, how would you say coming to America? I guess I'd ask what was your relationship not so much with Islam itself, but with the Muslim community in America? How do you feel about other Muslims in America, other immigrants from the Middle East in America? How have you connected with them? Do you feel there's a
Um,
it's a bit of a
mm,
general question, so
yeah.
take it as you
No,
please.
well, for one, I think that, the Muslim community in America. And when I say Muslim, I don't mean the actual faith. I mean people of, you know, countries that are predominantly Muslim.
Mm.
Are yeah, that's what I mean. I think that I think that there is this immediate, connection people make, because, like I said, there's this us versus them mentality, which, I'm not a big fan of personally. But I can see why it exists. So it's kind of like a we have a common enemy kind of thing. Or I don't want to say enemy as in like an actual country or entity, but more like, a thing, whether it be, racism, or, Islamophobia, or, imperialism, for example. So I think that for a lot of the Muslim community, there's this, I don't want to say immediate friendship, but there's this immediate connection where it's, it kind of like you have respect for them and they have respect for you. But to be honest, I feel like the more involved you get, there's a lot of, division that a lot of, people refuse to accept, or there's a lot of hatred and internal bigotry that a lot of people, refuse to accept. I mean,
Sorry, can you
yeah,
elaborate a bit more on that? I
yeah,
just don't know what you're kind of
yeah.
getting at there.
Okay, so people love saying, "Oh, you're my Middle Eastern brother, you're my South Asian brother," where it's like, I mean, sure, that could be true individual in an individual level, but there are also, a lot of individuals who are not being called out in the community, who think that, all Pakistanis are terrorists, all Afghans are, I've met, Arabs who, straight up said, before I met you, I thought a lot of you Afghans were all, rapists and murderers. And it's like, how is that my brother? How is that? You can say, oh, we're all brothers, but it's like, you look at me and you see me differently. Or, I've met, Afghans who think, Arabs in America are all infidels. They're saying, things like that. Where it's like, how can is that really your brother, or is this? It's like they wanted. people want to draw a fake line, like fake line to each other, which I think it exists, but I don't think it's as prominent as they leave it to be. It's the same as saying like why don't it's the same as saying, why don't black people and Asian people get along? I mean, yeah, I'm sure you've heard that before. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
we are all experience racism. Why don't we get along? Well, look at how some Asian people, black people, look at how some black people have treated Asian people. You know what I mean? It's you can unity needs everyone's involvement. So it's hard to say, oh, we're all unified when it's not true, especially to a political level. Saudi Arabians, there was this Saudi Arabian prince. He straight up said, "We need to kick out Afghans. They're rapists."
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
There, there was this, look at the recent, Pakistani drone strikes on Afghans. The most recent one, I'm pretty sure, last I read, killed about 21 women and children. Or look at, how some Indians view Kashmiris. Like I said, this is not. I'm not saying all people view this thing. You
But
know what I'm saying?
there's this like you'd
Yeah,
almost you could almost say there's this tension between
of
like
course. Yeah,
wanting a sense of
yeah.
unified anything
It's
really.
it's a it's it's a dreamland. To say, oh, we're all Middle Eastern. Why don't we just come along? Well, tell that to the Middle Eastern dude who. You tell that to the Iranian dude who thinks that Iraqis are all, Iraqis deserve to die. To the, you know, um, tell that to the Syrian guy who saw his family get bombed by radicalist Islamist groups that were coming from different countries. It's we can say, oh, but why don't we all get along? And we can make efforts towards that, but unless we handle some external issues, that cannot occur. You know what I mean? Because that mutual respect does not overcome the more prominent uh I don't want to say hatred, but more prominent disrespect, if that
Bigotry.
makes sense. Bigotry, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so there's so you're sort of saying there's this like within the Muslim Middle Eastern and
yeah,
arguably just the I'm hesitant to use this term because obviously it's good because we're going to get into a whole different discussion about it
yeah.
later, but arguably just the non-white community among
Mm.
immigrants is there's this
Yeah,
very big sense of well we're
yeah,
there's this attempt to
yeah,
create various amounts of unity and then you look within the groups and they're still fighting and there's still
yeah,
conflict.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's really interesting.
yeah. It's like this will sound like a weird analogy, but it's like a kid wanting their arguing parents to, get along, or divorced parents to get along, where it's like, yeah, you can make efforts towards it, but let's be honest, there are bigger issues at hand that are causing this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and arguably you can see that same to a lesser extent I'd argue, but you can see that same idea of
Yeah,
conflict within
yeah,
like a community that wants to be a single group. You can even see that in the white community. You have so many
yeah.
different people saying we obviously it's smaller, but there's still a
Mm,
community that thinks of itself as white. And then you look in the white community and you still have
yeah.
various conflicts
Look
like
at look at Eastern Europeans, for example. Are the Balkans, people always when it comes to the Balkans are like, oh, well, all these Balkan people, they look the same, they have similar languages, similar cultures. Why don't they all just get along? Well, I mean, they can, I
yeah.
mean, what can you say? I mean, they can't in the conditions they're in currently. They can't because you will see they see people that live a few miles away from them and hate their guts. How can you create unity out of that? I mean, you can try to create unity out of that. It might be a little successful, but it's a nothing like not some major thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. It's not so simple to
yeah, yeah,
work
yeah,
together as a group.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said to the more American example of why can't black people and Asian people why can't we all just hold hands and get along? It's because it's just not realistic for the conditions that are current. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's still animosity within those and especially I mean you could say like the biggest reason people will say that is because they're not in those groups they don't see those animosities.
Yeah, yeah. But some people, there's also people in those groups that are kind of they're kind of they're kind of in denial about that animosity existing.
Mm.
Saying, oh, it's just created by other groups to divide us, or oh, it's just magnified by those people who do hate the other. hate other people in our group, where it's like not necessarily, because it does still exist and it's very prevalent, and it does overcome that mutual respect in many cases because of how extreme the actions out of it can become.
Yeah, and there's that yeah, and you've is that really there you're really we're really getting a lot of that sort of idea of how much identity can be like.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really seems like it's coming up a lot is the idea of how much identity can be almost constructed, and
Mm-hmm.
especially seems like it's constructed around like conflict.
Yeah.
And sort of, I suppose now would be a good time. This is one of the things this is one of the things I found most interesting when I've been
Yeah.
talking to you,
Yeah.
because I guess for people at home, such
Mm.
I've spoken with Alex here a few times before about various issues and various things about his heritage.
Yeah.
So one of the things I found the most interesting is your perspective on race in America, and
Mm.
especially because, like you've said before, you consider yourself you're Afghanistan, but you still consider yourself white, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's I suppose I guess I'd firstly just like what when did you start viewing yourself for lack of a better term, when did you start thinking about the about race as that,
Yeah. Oh, sorry about
or
that.
just in general, like what are you thinking,
Yeah.
where are you where do you come
Yeah.
from with that perspective?
So in Afghanistan, race is really, it is a concept. We know that some people are darker skinned, some people are lighter skinned, but it's not really a thing of you're white, I'm brown, we're different. The main focus when it comes to differences is mostly either ethnicity or religious. You know,
The different like
yeah,
the
yeah,
Pashtuns, Tajiks that you've been talking about, and
yes,
then
yes, yes. Or
there's this.
Sunnis or Shias.
So there's like just to sorry, just to
Yeah,
so
go
there
ahead.
is like a big there's like Sunnis and Shias in both ethnic, because there's some
Yeah,
Muslim communities that are
yeah,
like very homogenous, and then there's a
yeah,
lot
yeah.
of different
Yeah,
groups in
Not sorry, not America. Afghanistan is primarily Sunni, but we do have a good amount of Shias as well. And those Shias are constantly being targeted, by Sunni terrorist groups. Yeah, but when it comes to race, I know that some people, yes, lighter skin and darker skin, we recognize that, but we don't put a label on it, if that makes sense. Like it's more of a objective thing. It's not really a political or cultural thing. It's like if I saw if an Afghan saw someone who was brown, they would say that person's brown, or if they saw someone who was light skinned, they would say that person's white. But that brown person could be from Italy, and that white person could be a Aryan Pakistani.
hmm
They're not. But in America, you could see that, and this is the rationale. Okay, well, Pakistan is a non-Western country. Um primarily non-white, and they face racism. Therefore, that Pakistani man is brown. And then it comes to the Italian, and they'll say, "Oh well, it's a European country. They're white."
hmm
You know, does that make sense? It's there is
the
th-
race has
th-
stopped being about, it's not a
it's not
description
a
of who you
yeah, it's
are.
not a skin thing. It's a political or cultural thing. And the big issue with that is the standards are not only so hypocritical, but they're also so different that it's hard to classify anyone. I mean, I've said this before, in our the liberal community I live in Nebraska, it's very it's very, the liberal mindset is he's light skinned, yes, but he's Afghan and he's faced racism and discrimination, therefore he's brown. And I say, so Italians are brown too, then, right?
hmm
Because they face racism and discrimination. But no, but they're European. Oh, so it's about continent. So what if I was born in Poland and I had a different name? Would I then be white? Well, no, because you are ethnically Afghan. Oh, okay, so it's ethnicity. And then I say, okay, so what about the northern Indians who are very light skinned and have, green eyes, blue eyes? Are they brown? Well, yes, they're from India. It just doesn't make sense. It's a circular argument. It's hard to rationalize it because the definitions are based on a standard of a standard of what makes sense culturally and politically, and it's so different between each individual that it's a question that can never be solved because you're going to base it on different things. And I mean, there are some mixed individuals in America, mixed black and white, full on ginger hair, white skin, green eyes. I see that as white. To be honest, if you asked me, I would say yeah, they're white because rationally speaking, they have white skin.
Hmm.
But culturally and politically speaking, oh, they have the experience of a black American because they are mixed, therefore they are mixed or they are black. And I say to that, well, that just doesn't make sense. It's and our people will tell me I'm brown because I have the experience of a brown person, and still to me that doesn't make sense because
I mean,
you
even
know
the experiences of a brown person is going to be very diverse. I mean,
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
how much do you think you'd have in common with, like, you're Afghan, you
yeah,
speak in a, I think the definition is officially an Iranic language. You
yeah,
grew
yeah,
up in a country that's like war torn. You came here on
yeah.
an immigrant visa. You came here in a,
I'm not going to have the same experiences as a Indian who grew up in America.
yeah.
It's or there be some similarities? Yes, but I think that one thing that people are in denial about is the big thing when it comes to calling white people like me non-white because of where we're from. It's in a effort to be anti-racist. Does that make sense? Like they think that saying I'm white, they think that by saying I am brown, they are being anti-racist because they are recognizing that I had a different experience when it came to race in America. But if you really think about it, if anything, that in itself is racist because throughout history, various different groups have had their whiteness denied by groups that are racist. That's just the same thing, but flipped around. I mean, look at the Irish Americans who came here. They weren't called white. Look at the Italian Americans. They weren't called white by racists. Look at various Jewish groups. They were told that they were all non-white because some of them um originated from the modern Lebanese and Palestinian Israeli areas. Well, a lot of them were European and white and looked exactly like the people being racist to them. It it is a racist thing to, deny the skin color someone has because you want to shape it politically to make you look better. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It's yeah,
there's a lot of, like, enforced,
yeah,
and yeah, I keep pointing out these things that we're sort of running into again and again,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's fascinating stuff. There's
yeah,
a lot of, you especially are someone who seems to have run into a lot of scenarios,
yeah.
and more generally, there's a lot of scenarios where various people
Hmm.
really, really want the world to be ironic, black and white. They want it to
Yeah,
be
exactly.
identities. They want there to be
Exactly.
clear identities, and those don't
Yeah.
exist.
They don't. Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, you know, it's a very common take that if you ask anyone, is race real? They'll say no, it's not real. Because who is to determine if I am, white and who is to determine I am black, brown? It is a very subjective thing. There are genetic or, scientific portions to, such as phenotypes or, our genetic diversity, but the main idea of like when you check off on a list, let's say a government list, I am white or I am black or I am native or I'm Hispanic. That main thing, it's all subjective. You know what I mean? It all comes from what we view as non-white or white. You know what I mean? I mean, I've met, according to the U.S. Census in itself, Afghans are white. But I've met a lot of Afghans who are, very brown skinned. I've met, according to the census, I don't remember this rule now, but last I checked, the U.S. Census said Indians are, considered brown. Well, what about the Northern Indians who are, white and have green eyes? Who have a more, Aryan look. So what about them? It's like it's you want to create a box where it's not there, and then when it's not there you keep trying to justify that box with different standards when it's really as simple as saying yes, this person is white skinned, yes, this person is brown skinned. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
It's it's
it's an
almost
over justification effect. You know, you want it to be true, so you keep applying these different, or not over justification. It's moving the goalpost. You want to
mhm,
move the goalpost to conform someone to your idea if they are white or brown. When someone says I am brown, they don't they know that skin tone wise I'm not brown. You know,
mhm.
I'm white. I'm white just like you. I'm basically the same skin tone as you. You
Yeah.
know, but
The one example I always go to is I've met a few Greek people,
yeah,
and you can, and I can like, when you like line like someone like you up next to a Greek
yeah,
person, you'd be like, the Greek person has darker skin,
yeah, exactly what I mean.
and yet a Greek
I yeah
person's from Europe and you are from the
yeah.
Middle East, so there's a
So
difference somehow.
so they move the goalpost and say, okay, well he's white skinned, but he's also Afghan, and he's also experienced racism, and blah blah yap yap yap. Therefore he's brown.
Hmm.
It's making a connection where it doesn't exist. To be completely honest, and I could go on about this for hours and hours, but let me tell you, the first time I came to America, I was filling out a sheet and at this refugee center, I was filling out a sheet and it asked us about race. I put I put I put white.
Hmm.
I put white. I was young and I said, okay, I have white skin, therefore I'm white. Gave the paper to the guy and says, you put white here, and I was like, yeah. He says, well, you're not white, and I was like, why? And he said, you're Afghan, right? And I said, yeah. I didn't say this, but I'm like, well, yeah, I'm Afghan. I'm ethnically Afghan, but I'm still white. He said, no, you would be brown. I have white skin though.
Hmm.
And I was just like, okay, I guess I'll put brown. But that's the thing, it doesn't make sense. It's based on factors that are so subjective and so individual that it just can't it just doesn't make sense to put people in that box. So I think when it comes to race in America, it's become a very political thing where it all depends on what your personal standard of what makes up someone's race is, which is so stupid to me, to be honest, because you know that means that, like, you could, logically speaking, by that logic, you could look at a very brown skinned person and say they're white, if you really think about it, because
It's
and that happens all the time, like you said, with for example, Greek people, or Southern Europeans who have more brown skin, for example. It doesn't make sense. It's
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, yeah. There's and it's definitely one of those things you really notice is like that the fact that it's just there's this as an American, you get used to the idea of you have to think of the world in racial terms.
yeah,
And then when you meet someone who grew up in a non-American context, that there's
mm,
that part of them isn't like baked in, so it's hard to apply that. And it gets
mm.
and especially for Americans, like would you you can if you might you can disagree with me here, but it seems like there's a lot of Americans who struggle to understand the world outside of America because that world isn't cast in that sort of racial context.
To an extent, I would agree, because for example, look at ethnic conflicts. You wouldn't see really in this day and age, in this context, you wouldn't see ethnic conflicts in America. You're not really going to see, I mean, back then, for example, we could talk about, how Italians and Irish Americans, didn't like each other, or Polish Americans were disliked, but in a modern context, you're not going to see lots of, ethnic conflict, in the sense that we all originated here, but I'm the original. You
Hmm.
know, it's going to be mostly in the sense of, stereotypes, or belief of wrongdoing. But look at, let's say, for example, a country that has a lot of ethnic tensions. They're going to say, oh, why can't they all just it's the same thing with unity you talk about. Why can't they all come together? They all look the same and have very similar culture. Where it's like, not really. Sure, they do have some similarities, but not enough to stop that fighting, stop that conflict. I think Americans in general look at race through an exclusively American lens, and when they are outside of that lens, they get confused. I mean, I met a person who is a white Arab, and this conversation got up, and she was like, she made a joke about, she was like, dang, I can't believe, white people do this. And I was kind of confused. I was like, but aren't you white? And she was like, no, I'm Arab. And like I said, back to the same thing, but you're white skinned.
Yeah.
And then to prove her point, I was like, because she said she was going to Sweden on a trip 2 or 3 months from that. And I said, okay, remember this: when you go on that trip to maybe it was not Sweden, it was a European country. I was like, when you go to that trip, put yourself as um brown when when you reach customs, like the things you travel through, and I want you to see if it's true. And she did that, and they gave the paper back to her and said, "Why did you put brown?" Yeah, because you're white. Like I don't know what to tell you. There's this really weird. I think another part of it is people really don't want to be portrayed. It's like Middle Eastern or South Asians who you know haven't been treated as if they fall under that definition of white. They don't want to call themselves white. You know what I mean? Because they think that that takes away from the experience. But I'm like, no, white people can face racism. I mean, look at Jewish people. Look at Italian Americans. Look at Irish Americans. Like uh that taking away of your whiteness is racism in itself because they don't think you fit this racist idea of what being white is. And I think that's a big part of it. I think that there's this really negative connotation with calling yourself white if you're South Asian or Middle Eastern for some reason, which to me, one only occurs in America. I mean, if you go to the Middle East and South Asia, everyone's gonna think you're crazy if you don't call yourself white and you're white skin
Mm.
because they're like that doesn't make sense. You have white skin. But two, um, it's more of a political. It's like I said, it's a political thing. So it doesn't make sense because you're not doing it out of rationality. You're doing it out of a opinion or belief that you hold.
It's sort of, it would be like if we started like saying like it would be like if you what's an example here? It'd be like if people made all their political decisions based off of if someone had like blonde or brown hair.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
if you met someone from, there's like Central Asia or Afghanistan that has blonde hair, or there's some Pacific Islanders who are like extremely dark skinned and then are
Yeah.
some of the most blonde hair in the world.
Yeah.
And you met someone like them and they'd be like, no, you're not blonde because you're from countries that are brown haired.
Exactly. Exactly
Yeah.
what I mean. And no country can be, I mean, well, I think some countries could be, considered a white or a black or a brown country, but I think it's important to remember that there are, that you can't group them as that because, that's just unfair to the person because that means you're saying they're not ethnically something because of those standards that you made yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so sort of moving on. I want to move back to Afghanistan for a little
Yeah.
bit. I suppose my question would be like, do you have any, I guess like, hmm. I suppose, do you think there's any like personal story experience that you can remember that you feels like, you talked earlier about the fact that like a lot of people don't see those sort of they only see like
Yeah.
one very particular lens of
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I know this is a broad question,
Yeah.
so don't worry if you
It's
if
no
you can't
problem.
think of something perfect for it, but like, do you think that do you have like a story from growing up in Afghanistan that you feel really encapsulates like that really encapsulates a different part of life in Afghanistan that's really outside of that lens we usually
Hmm.
see?
Um, Probably every time I went to the, downtown Kabul markets. So for anyone who's listening, Kabul is just the capital of Afghanistan, and it's a big market capital. We have a lot of street markets selling various things. Um, I didn't live in Kabul, so going there would kind of be like a nice little vacation thing. And every time I went there, the interactions with people you have are very nice because you get to meet with a lot of people in such a short amount of time, and that connection that you have, even though you just met them, is really strong. They treat you as if you're family. They get they're very homely, even you know they're very homely. They're always I remember they would provide me food and water sometimes, while I was just shopping around, things of that sort. And I think that I feel like that is something that I really cherish because obviously supermarkets in America are not like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, just getting to connect to people on such a personal level and, get those home crafted things, talk to these people who are, small business owners. Uh, I feel like it's rare to see in America nowadays, even though it was a big part of it, just that, connection with your, small business owner.
Hmm.
So I think that's very, specific, but I do think, it's getting to meet the people who run the country outside of corporations. It's very um not only interesting but very valuable because those are the people who see you as more than just a consumer. And I feel like I don't get that many opportunities to do that where I live in Nebraska, but in Kabul, I got to see that all the time. There was even one guy I played video games with him for like 2 hours. Just in the market as his brother was selling things. We were just playing FIFA on Xbox. And that's something that I don't really get to have anymore in America. But so I do think that is something that like every time people have asked me, should I travel to Afghanistan? I say, yeah, go to Kabul. It's a really fun, enjoyable experience, and I think that those are the things in life that, because of various reasons, you can't experience them in America to the same extent or in the same ways. So yeah, that's something that I definitely miss and cherish.
Oh yeah.
Just that more broad than that, just that connection with the people who are making up your country, because there's corporations in Afghanistan, obviously, but no, not with, they don't have the same power. You know what I mean?
All right. So two things.
Yeah.
One. I'm gonna get into something that's interesting and a sort of
Okay.
comparison. But first, I just wanted to say so. I don't want to correct you, but
Yeah.
the word homely in America technically is a way of calling someone unattractive.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah,
No,
so
I
you
thought
mean like comfortable and like welcoming, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's what.
Yeah, I don't know why it means that, but for some reason
Huh.
that's a term.
Yeah. Sorry about that. That's definitely
It's
what.
pretty obscure, so but in case anyone was wondering, you mean more
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
welcoming.
yeah, yeah. That's what I meant.
Yes. But so more generally, that's really interesting. So you'd say like Kabul, it's a big city, it's
Yeah.
fairly big
Yeah.
city, and the way you talked about it, it's very similar to like when people describe, oh, we went to
Times Square, for
Times
example.
Square in New
Yeah.
York. Yeah, but by comparison, like if you think about Times Square, it's full of like a million big supermarkets and
Yeah.
super shops and stuff. And
Yeah.
then, but Kabul, there's more of a culture of small business
Yeah.
owners and
It
homemade goods and
it's
stuff,
kind of like, I mean, in America, I forgot what they're called, but those things where it's like those events where,
like a farmer's market
yeah,
almost.
like a farmer's market.
Yeah.
That's kind of, actually, that's exactly what it's like in my opinion. Uh, the person you meet at a farmer's market who's growing apples, out of his backyard or maybe his tiny farm, you know, it's he's more reciprocative to you than walking into a grocery store, buying an apple, and putting on the sticker and leaving. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's that sense of that's interesting. So there's that sense of like that person. You played like FIFA with a guy who
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
did you know that person
No,
before?
I didn't know him. I
Just
just saw him. I was like, I was maybe 5, 6 years old. I played the game a little bit. I saw him playing, and I was just watching him play. And then he was like, "Hey, you want to join in, man? Play a few games with me?" I was like, "Yeah, why not?"
yeah,
You can't do that at like a Walmart, for
yeah,
example. This is not gonna happen.
yeah. No, that's so. There's that sense of like there's that sense there's that personal touch instead of being so corporate. There's that more cultural element
Hmm.
too, and that's really interesting. I mean, that's yet another example of the whole like what is a community like. Did you ever think like, oh, is that kid Pashtun or is that kid Tajik?
No,
Like,
no. I
no.
mean, that's all, sure, ethnicities are, natural, but the ideas you place on someone's ethnicity, that's something that you develop from the, context you grow up in, the environment you grow up in. So that's really, that's something that I never really held and still don't hold. I don't see myself as, Pashtun, or, I don't see myself as, someone who's part Tajik. I don't see myself as a Pashtun speaker or a Farsi speaker. I just see myself as Afghan. You know what I mean? Like, or more, but more than that, I just see myself as Alex. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, so, those occurrences, those beliefs and ideas, they are prevalent and they do impact people, but it only holds as much significance in your belief system as you let it. And sometimes that's hard to challenge. I'm not gonna lie. That's how every stereotype is. If you hear a stereotype of a group in the group that you're in, you're gonna believe that. But at the end of the day, it's not an internal thing or a genetic thing. It's just something that you learn from your environment. But being a young kid and having that innocence where you just connect with people if you like something about them or like something they have, that's not really impacted, and that's also not very present by such beliefs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you've got that. Yeah. So you've got that sense of it's just
Yeah,
people, you know?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's very interesting. So yeah, I'm fascinated by the image of of a city that's large and developed and urban. It's the capital of an entire country, and yet it still has these small markets and little
yeah.
places like
Yeah, and
you.
those small markets are the entire backbone of Kabul.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have supermarkets and things like that, of course, but that's not the reason you'd go there. That's not the reason. That's not the thing you'd want to experience or remember when you go there. Where I would argue, with places like Times Square or downtown Chicago, kind of the opposite. You want to say you went to those big stores. You want to say you went to you bought something expensive from there. You want to say, you walked past all of them. You know what I mean?
Mm.
But when it comes to Kabul, that's not really why. You know what I mean?
It's that very welcoming community, and
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
that's that's really fascinating because like I've been to a few big cities in America, and the one thing I'll say is you can find those sort of small buildings. I remember one of my weirdest memories is when I was in Boston a few years ago,
Yeah.
and the out of all my parents took me to 50 million fancy restaurants, and yet the only one I remember is this one dingy like Greek place we went to
Hmm.
that was on a corner and everything was greasy, but it was like it's like, oh, this is what Boston is for
Yeah.
Bostonians. But that's that same idea. But the thing is that that's the type of thing where like it gets like
It's
lost.
memorable.
Yeah, and it's like, but that sort of identity of that sort of on the ground like small business owners, those people, those get lost in some of those big cities, and it seems like it's still like there in Kabul. That's fascinating. So you didn't grow up in Kabul. You grew up where obviously, I don't think we need to know like specifically where you
Yeah,
grew
yeah.
up, but like what was your hometown like? What was your home region like?
It was slightly urbanized, but also slightly rural. If that makes sense, it was a mix.
Mm.
I primarily stayed in the more rural parts of it. The more lower mountainous regions where a lot of houses were built. Where a lot of people were living off the land.
Sorry, can you explain that a little more? You mean little lower mountainous region? What do you
Oh,
mean by that?
sorry.
So
There's a lot of communities, that are within the mountains, but a lot of them are also off to the side.
so
You
like
know,
in valleys more?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
That's a good. Yeah, sorry about that.
no,
That's
it's
a way of describing it. Oh yeah, I usually lived off there.
so
There's.
you'll have would you say there's like usually the big urban areas are like at the very bottom of the valley and then
Oh,
like it
oh
gets
yeah,
more
yeah,
rural
definitely,
as you go up the mountain?
definitely, definitely. Yeah,
Oh, so that okay, so you grew up sort of like on a mountainside, not
yeah,
like on a cliff or
yeah,
anything. You
yeah,
weren't
yeah,
you weren't like fighting eagles,
yeah, yeah.
but
Exactly.
you grew up sort of in that more rural
Hmm.
region. Hmm.
Hmm.
All right, and then so how do you think that like what do you think that there's like a sort of like in America, there's a lot of talk about urban rural divides, and there's this big
Yeah,
culturals like there's this big sense of culture that you can see in like every American,
yeah.
like especially like like with the Midwest areas and those
Mm,
middle of the United States things. There's that big urban
yeah.
rural divide. What was that like in Afghanistan?
I would say it's actually pretty similar to America. For one, both communities, they have certain parts of their, way of living that they like and dislike, but they also have certain parts of the other way of living that they also like and they dislike. But most people are, like I said, they're indifferent to it. They just live their life day to day. They do what they think is the best way to get food on the table. And some people think that's urban, some people think that's rural. But when it comes to a divide, a lot of the more urban population, similar to America, it's more elitist in the sense that they think they are more developed, and I hate to say this, but they do think they're more civilized,
Mm,
quote unquote, compared to the people living in the more rural areas. And I could go on about this, but a lot of that is also connected to um, ethnicity and how and ethnicity and different groups of people, different groups, and how they view them. But in general, the more urban population, they their goals for Afghanistan are different. They want to see Afghanistan get westernized. Not I don't want to generalize everyone in the urban populations, but a lot of them want to see a more I don't want to say westernized, more modernized,
mm,
more modernized country, developed infrastructure, more factories, an industrial focus, while and that leads to them thinking that these rural individuals who kind of refuse to accept this version of modernization kind of leads to them thinking that they're attempting to hold back this development, which does lead to some animosity, uh, in the sense that they think you're trying to hold back progress, you're trying to hold back us living better lives, and flip the coin. A lot of the more rural individuals who live off the land and rarely, but sometimes will get involved in these urban communities. Um, they think that they're trying to make Afghanistan something is not. They think that this change is not only unnecessary but also for various different reasons impractical, whether it be they think it's trying to adjust the culture too much, whether they think it's you know it's not intact with their religious beliefs, whether they think that it's too western, and in some cases they think it's degenerate too, to be completely honest. I think when you tell them that what's going on in the urban areas similar to, let's say, the Bible Belt in America, they think of they think of a lot of what they consider to be degeneracy, whether it be partying or red light districts, anything of that sort. So it's the opposite, where they think they're trying to make Afghanistan something it shouldn't be. So they kind of have this animosity towards them in the sense that not only do you want to ruin our country and our culture, but you also want to come after my standard of living. So they think that it's going to be forced
mm,
urbanization in the sense that you're going to come and take my village away from me and build a factory. For example, you're like they think that their way of life is going to impact theirs, and you can also, and that's how it is on both sides. Both think that one is trying to overtake the other, but with the that belief is more prevalent with the rural community because they feel under attack since Afghanistan has been industrially and infrastructurally developing, in the past few decades, especially during times of more relative peace and times of external support. So um they are in contest, but it's not it's not like it's not a big divide. Like, it's not as big a divide in America. I mean, in America it's a very there's a very big cultural war going on around
mm,
urban versus rural, that maybe a rural person thinks look at these rural homes, traditional homes. Kids are going to schools filled with LGBTQ propaganda, and then the urban schools saying, look at these uncivilized hicks. They're still living off the land. Trying to they're still living off the land, failing to become modern. They're basically in content. If that makes sense, like
Yeah.
there is contest, but it's not as significant as it is in America. I mean, at the end of the day, both sides just want to do their own thing, and that's probably true for a majority of America. But there is a big highlight in America on the cultural war that surrounds that urban and rural divide.
Yeah.
But another big thing is Afghanistan is not as urban as America. It is still, and it's very important to note this. It's still in its taking its first baby steps
Mm.
into becoming more industrially and infrastructurally developed. So I feel like as that development continues, that divide might change a little more. And to be honest, we could probably see something similar to what's going on in America, where both sides are in constant contest.
Mm. So that's really interesting. It gets me kind of thinking, and this is something I've seen a few times as you've talked about like life in Afghanistan, is that you have this country that is been at war with it, has had conflict within it, wars within it for decades,
Hmm.
for going on half a century now.
Hmm.
Has there's been various conflicts in Afghanistan but with other countries invading and with internal militants fighting each other. And yet there's this still seems to be always this very strong sense of unity and then an identity. And even if there seems to be and even if there's conflict, it sounds, at least from how you've described it, like there really is a feeling of there really is in general an attempt to be one group and an attempt to work together.
Hmm.
And then you see, and this is again my perspective. I'm an
Yeah.
American. You see, when you're within America, you see this country that really feels like
Yeah.
it's not it's two countries it's two nations or even more that don't see
Hmm.
themselves as one group, and it's sort of strange to see that dichotomy between a
Yeah.
country that is at war with itself and a country that isn't, and yet the country that's at war with itself seems to have almost more of a sense of an identity than the one that doesn't.
Hmm.
And if you would you disagree with that sentiment or
Um, I think I agree, but it's also important to note in Afghanistan, just like how there's so much political divide here, there is political divide there. It's just the way that the way it is handled and the way it is, what it's structured around just differs so heavily that, it's probably hard to, it's probably harder to comprehend, the divide that's going on there. But I also agree with you in the sense that I think that, um, you know, the 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 fracturing of America, especially as we see it politically, especially between, I don't think I need to say it, but political parties, especially in recent years, as polarization increases, um, I think that it is definitely, it is to an extent similar in some ways, but I think that the main thing that differs it is a lot of it is not really, uh, how do I explain this? Sorry, I'm trying to find a way to word
just
this.
take your
So
time, don't
yeah,
worry.
I think in America the divide is it can be handled, but there's kind of this. It could compared to Afghanistan, it's harder to handle that because of various different factors. It's harder to come together because of various different factors. But in America, it is easier to be bipartisan and handle these issues. That the means are available, unlike in Afghanistan, but it's not occurring because of these minute or personal differences in political belief. So that's what I think is really the big issue: the fact that the means are definitely there, and we have seen it, in many instances, but it's not occurring.
Mm.
So why that is, I honestly I can't answer that. I'm sure there's various different reasons that, maybe there's reasons that behind closed doors when it comes to the political parties that we don't see. but I do think that that is a big factor that the means are there, are at the very least more available and ready to use, but they're not being used. I think that's a big difference in my opinion.
Mm. Yeah, so that's really interesting. Yeah, no, that's definitely um that's I'm saying the same things over and over again,
Yeah,
but that is fascinating.
yeah,
Just, don't want to um I guess moving back to Afghanistan, just trying to get again, still trying
yeah.
to get like an idea of like what is it like in Afghanistan, what's the culture like,
Hmm.
not just I don't want to just dissect like, oh, war and stuff.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's good
Hmm.
for Americans to
Yeah,
really
man.
see like the everyday of Afghanistan. And
Yeah,
so
man. Yeah.
since you grew up in the rural regions, like for many Americans,
Hmm.
especially those that grew up in areas that are rural or more rural, there's a certain culture around the farming
Yeah.
there. So in Afghanistan, what would you say is like the big thing that like rural people do, for lack of a better term?
Hmm.
Like, what would you say that looks like when you drive through? I think the stereotype is, of course, when you drive through someplace like I think Indiana would be the stereotypical
Yeah.
one. It's like, oh yes, there's cornfields for days. Or
Yeah.
if you drive like out in Nebraska, for example,
Hmm.
or maybe Nebraska or one of the other ones like Kansas,
Sorry.
like
I know what the word is. I know what the main, crops and vegetables and fruits, are in Farsi, but I don't know what they would be called in English. So do you mind if I like quickly,
yeah, no,
look up
don't
the
go ahead.
translations? Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, okay, that's yeah. I don't know how I didn't recognize this, but because I know what watermelon is. I don't know why it didn't come to my head, but I know for a fact that in the area I grew up in, there was a big focus on watermelons.
Interesting.
And along with that, also date production. I remember that what a lot of what would occur is dates would be made at home in the or at the village, and then someone would travel, or a few people would travel to the more urban areas and sell them.
Mm,
That's how we get money to buy other things that we need to live. So um that, and also a big thing that I noticed was um our farming, we did farm, but a bit we mostly, would herd animals. That's the thing.
right. Yeah, that's
That,
the
that's a big focus, just herding animals, and because this is just, I don't think there is probably geographical reasons for it that I can't, think of off the top of my head, or maybe I don't know, but I know for a fact one part of it is just, we eat meat with everything,
mm-hmm.
whether it's rice or meat on its own or soup, just every kind of meat. Meat is like, it's very rare to eat an Afghan meal where there's no sort of meat involved in one way or another. Um, I know in America that that's of course it's common to eat, but there's a lot of traditional. I guess you could say, I don't want to say traditional, but like traditional, like commonly eaten American foods where, that you buy like off a grocery store, for example, that there's not really any meat involved. So like, I guess so one way to
and
put it is it's easier to be vegetarian here than it is there. You know what I mean?
and that gets into the I think a lot of people pointed this out before is that there's definitely this thing where like for a lot of societies, for some societies like with that, just to because this is
Yeah.
some of the stuff I get interested in, like for Afghanistan, there's since it's drier, more mountainous,
Hmm.
is it a fairly dry region, or at least where you grew up, would you say it's fairly
It
dry?
was it's very, hot and dry where I grew up in, but depending on where you go, it can actually be very cold,
Mm.
especially the parts near Iran. Um Especially the, like southeastern regions, I think it is. There's actually a lot of snowing and raining, things of that sort, a lot of seasonal changes, but for where I grew up it was just, traditionally very hot.
Mm, and that might have
Some
to
rain, like enough rain, let's say that. But not enough rain to like where you need to buy a raincoat. For example, I guess that's one way to put it.
so like and I'd imagine since it's like that area is mountainous and it's like there's as you go, would you say that as you go farther north in Afghanistan it gets like drier? Is that like the
Um,
stereotype roughly? I'm gonna open the door.
to be honest, I can't really answer that. I'd like to say I'm more understanding of the national, you know, the geographic makeup of Afghanistan, but I usually stayed in my own community, and when I didn't, it would be in the more urban areas. So I haven't researched it that much. I can't answer that
Hmm.
to be honest with you. I don't want to give you an answer that's false, but one thing I will tell you is that similar to other countries in the region, the weather patterns and um season patterns vary vastly depending on where you are. And that environment does heavily impact what kind of lifestyle you chase, or how you make your living.
Mm. Yeah, so that's really interesting. I don't know, the geography of
Yeah,
Afghanistan.
it's very split up.
It's very diverse, and
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why you have so many different, it's such a diverse place with so
Hmm.
many different peoples. But yeah, I guess I was asking about the farming mostly just because like
Hmm.
where I grew up, and I think for a lot of Americans, the agriculture can end up being like a big chunk of
Yeah.
the culture and identity. And so I was
Yeah.
wondering, I guess, like, do you think that there's people who see like uh dates or watermelons or herding various animals?
Yeah.
I think the stereotype would be like herding goats, like for
Yeah. Yeah.
either cheese or for
Yeah. Yeah.
meat. Did you say that's the most common one, or you think like if you ever went through the like if I'm assuming you went on you'd go on car rides at some point or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like when you were driving through the countryside of Afghanistan, did
Uh-huh.
you see like a lot of like any particular animal? I know
Um.
this is kind of a
Yeah, I
weird
did. I did. No, that's
it's kind
not a
of a
weird
weird
question. I like
question,
it.
but
But like you said, yeah, goats were a big one. But another one was sheep.
mm,
Sheep were very common. Similar to America. And another big one was cows. That's the most ones that I remember, to be
mm.
honest. Like I said, I can't there are probably way more animals that are
Oh
being
yeah,
herded because
obviously.
of the geography allows for various different animals. Some of them very exotic too, you know to be herded. But the ones that I see are common in America as well,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, no, absolutely. And then like, so do you think that like there's that do you, just completely spitballing here, do you think there's been like do you think that like the culture um I don't know, do you think that like whenever you were in rural Afghanistan there was like a cultural influence of those of those of what like they produced, like, oh, we're melon farmers, we always we
No,
yeah, not
no,
really.
not really. It's mostly just a monetary thing. I feel like in America there is an identity around it. Because I mean, I'm not going to say there was no identity or no, like cultural significance in Afghanistan either regarding these crops or herding practices. But there isn't really a reason to create an identity around it, if that makes sense. Like it's mostly like a pride thing. Like you're proud of where you're from and what you do. So you're proud of what you grow in
Mm,
connection. But in America, especially since agriculture has been on a huge decrease. I mean, just I don't even think I need to say that for people to know, but there definitely kind of is this culture around it. Like you said, and I think that's present because there kind of has to be one to preserve it in a sense. You have to have some sort of pride for it to stop it from being taken over by this by urbanization. But in Afghanistan, that's not really the case.
so
Like I
since
said, there's not really a big defense needed to preserve that lifestyle because it's not necessarily being challenged. It's mostly just I'll do my thing, you do yours. So it's you kind of push it to the side if you disagree with it, if that makes sense.
interesting, so there's that, once again you're getting that, we get into that whole thing of like this is I this is a thing we've actually kind of talked about a few times before, is like how much identity seems to be built around having something
Hmm.
external and having something attacking you.
Hmm. Um, could you say that question one more time so I can kind of like get a better idea of what to say? Because
What was, sorry, what question?
the one you just said.
Oh, that was more just like a
Oh,
spitball
okay.
thought, but
Sorry. I
I'm
thought I
just
thought you
saying
were
like
just saying.
I'm just saying roughly it seems the thing I'm seeing a lot, and that's true of both Afghan and American
Yeah.
culture, is that it seems like a lot of times an identity is more built around having something outside to
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
oppose.
Sorry. Sorry. I misread I misheard what you said.
Yeah, but like with American farmers, like the reason that there's such a strong like farmer
Yeah.
identity in America is because it's more under threat than in
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
It is. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Oh. because it's more under threat, you have to have some sort of pride or identity around it to be able to protect it. Like it's kind of like saying this is my baby. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And I mean,
Yeah.
that's not really the case though. You don't need to protect it. There's not really anything coming after it. A lot of especially even the elitist urban Afghans recognize that rural living is and always will be, most likely always will be, a big part of the Afghan lifestyle for many Afghans, especially the ones who are more traditional. So one, there's not really a point in challenging it, and two, it's also you should just respect it because it's always going to be there. So they're kind of just like, okay, I'll develop, but you can I'll develop in my own ways. You can develop in your own ways. But in America, there's kind of this
Mm.
um this effort to urbanize, if that makes sense. As seen in recent years, or at the very least, if not urbanize, partake in different practices when it comes to farming, like vertical farms,
Oh
for
yeah.
example. Yeah, like for example, that's just one off the top of my head. But yeah, that's not really the case in Afghanistan. Is my main point.
Yeah, that's very interesting to see that sort of difference between that and the way that identity is shaped. So again, sort of jumping around, I think that's a pretty that's a pretty good roundup of like
Yeah,
getting a better idea for, hey, that if you're in Afghanistan, it's not all going to be, Taliban militants and stuff.
yeah, of
There's
course.
there's people living their lives. You've got all those different.
Yeah,
It's really nice to see those stories and that sort
mm,
of, this is what it was like. It wasn't all insane.
yeah,
And so to sort of get another aspect of it, that's what Afghanistan is. That's not what Afghanistan is like, but
yeah,
that's what it was like for you, if
hmm,
nothing else.
yeah.
Every
And like I
country's
said, I don't know if I said this or not, but it's very important to know my experience is not universal. There are probably a lot of upper class Afghans who are connected to the military, or had a lot of money to dispose of, that they probably never even experienced parts of the war directly. And I'm sure there are also Afghans who are very lower class that experience horrors that are worse than what I can imagine. When it comes to war. So you know um I just wanted to note that real quick, because I don't want it to seem like I am the spokesperson of Afghans, because the situation is so complex and so diverse, and there's so many factors to it that I'm just one voice of many. You know.
It's easy to forget that it's easy for a lot of people to forget that Afghanistan is an entire country, and
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can't.
And that one part of the reason for that is there are only very specific parts of Afghanistan that are highlighted by the
Mm,
media, like I mentioned previously. So, you know,
like I've never heard of a city outside of in Afghanistan besides Kabul.
yeah,
Like you
exactly that
never
point.
hear.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's rational to highlight the significant parts of what's impacting America, but at the same time, it is important to note that that's not the only part. You know what I mean?
There's all this
When
diversity.
reaching
There's
conclusion, yeah,
no, I mean, most people wouldn't imagine there'd be rain or snow in Afghanistan.
yeah.
They're going to imagine sort of
Very
close,
hot
very.
hot deserts, like in Hollywood, where like everything you see is yellow, and things like that.
Yeah, the Mexican filter has been
Yeah,
the thing in the
exactly.
memes recently.
Yeah,
Um, but so sort of to ask about a different aspect of your life is, obviously you're also an immigrant. You immigrated to the
yeah.
United States, and I think one thing that's very interesting is learning about the immigration process.
Hmm.
And so I'm gonna just ask a few questions about what that was like.
Yeah,
So, firstly, you said you were in India for a little bit.
yeah.
So, sorry, how long were you in India?
Um, if I were, I think about 3 or 4 years. Somewhere around that mark. I can't say for sure how long, but I was there for a good while. We were just saving up money. Trying to making connections, trying to find that way to get out of India. Because
Interesting.
India, well, we kind of treated it as like the initial safeguard, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
And so, what was it like in India? Did you make a lot of connections with Indian? First, where were you in India? Because that's a big country.
We were in New Delhi.
So like in the sort of central, like the
Yeah, yeah,
sense, not the center of the country, but the
yeah,
center of northern India. Yeah, and that
yeah.
So, did you make a lot of connections with the local people there, or was it mostly staying like with other
Um,
Afghans in India?
for one, there's not there is a significant number of Afghans in India, but not a big enough one to like where like you could create a community out of it, if that makes sense.
It's not you can't have like a
It was
well,
like
it's you can't have like a
yeah.
Little Italy or
Yeah,
Chinatown,
yeah,
but
exactly.
for
But like you would know, the Afghans that are around you because just naturally you want to be around your people a little bit.
it's like you described in America, you
Yeah,
meet one and you meet them all
yeah,
almost.
exactly, exactly.
Well,
You know,
that's the wrong way to put it, but like
no,
once you've met one, you become
exactly, exactly. Um, so mostly what we would do is just work and do our own thing. We would try to just stay on our own road because to be honest, I can't deny it, there were cases where a lot of so some not a lot, some Indians were racist to us, or just racist in general to immigrants who were coming from areas we were around, Pakistan, Afghanistan, so if we could make friends, we would, and we did, and if we could form, bonds, we did. We did. But we would mostly just try to keep to ourselves and stay away from the politics of it all and
mm,
say, hey, if they think this of us, that's okay. We're not gonna challenge it. We're not gonna, kind of like what I said, being passive about it.
mm,
We're not gonna challenge it. We're not gonna, vote. We're not gonna do anything like that. We're just gonna work and focus on our lives.
yeah, it's
Go to work, go home, go to school, go home. You know what I mean?
you just got to keep yourself
Yeah,
going. It's the same thing as it's that very consistent thing. Yeah, most
yeah,
people this is one of those things that's always very interesting to see when you speak with someone of another culture is the fact that we always assume everyone lives their lives differently,
yeah,
and we simultaneously assume so many things are the same about
yeah,
people that are different, and so many things that are different are the
yeah,
same. Like we assume if you're in Afghanistan, that means your whole life is oriented around the war
yeah,
and the militants and all that stuff.
yeah,
And we assume if you're living your life in a country like India, where there's a lot of discrimination based on whether or not you're from that sort of Pakistan, Iran,
yeah,
Afghanistan region,
yeah.
we assume that that's like the whole part of your life. But
Mm.
for a lot of it, it's just that core experience of like I've just got to keep living.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I always like to tell, Americans is that you have more in common with your working class. You as a working class American have more in common with a working class Afghan than you do with a politician that is running your country. Do you get what I'm saying? It's like we are more similar than a lot of people would like us to believe. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess like just more generally, I don't know. Do you have a just just because to close off the India thing because it's very interesting that
Yeah,
you spent some time in India as well.
yeah,
Do you have any like funny or just personal favorite
yeah.
memories from India?
To be honest, one thing I loved about India was just just the nightlife of it. To be honest, it was a very interesting and fun nightlife. I mean, in America and in India, maybe it was just because I lived in New Delhi, which was a very highly urban population, very dense populated area. Um, but no matter what day it was, no matter what time of year, no matter what month, it was always very lively, and you could always experience something new. And I think, yeah, I don't want to say living in India. I want to say living in New Delhi. It felt like living in a capital. Not sorry, not living in capital. Living in like Times Square a little bit. So I think that part of it, especially that nightlife or how lively the area was, I think is very interesting. Getting to get new restaurants. Like seeing new restaurants open up like once a month. Seeing I remember there were a lot of there was a lot of arcades and a lot of game rooms, for example, which I remember very fondly. And I also think meeting new people when we got the chance is also very interesting. So, just living in New Delhi was a very interesting experience to me.
Yeah,
And it kind of to me felt like going to when I went to Times Square about 3 or 4 years ago. That's kind of what it felt like.
yeah. It must have been. I mean, for you, it must have been one of the largest cities you've ever been in
Yeah,
because like
definitely, definitely. Pretty sure it was technically was the largest.
yeah, New I mean New Delhi is. I
Yeah,
mean when you compare. when you compare like New Delhi to
Hmm.
Kabul, one of them is obviously like a big city,
Yeah.
but then the other one is it's a massive capital in India. Very, very,
Hmm.
very interesting, and must have been a very interesting experience. So, um, you said you came over as a on a political visa to
Yeah.
the United
As
States.
a refugee on a temporary visa, yes, at first.
So, what was that experience like? Like, what was it? What was the if you can like
Hmm.
walk us through like
Yeah.
what the experience was.
So I know for one thing that my experience was, probably very different than a lot of the other, people who went through the immigrant process. I know for a fact that we got accepted to we got the after filling out enough paperwork, we got accepted to get that temporary
And so you
visa.
started filling out the political visa from India.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So we got enough paperwork, things of that sort. And then when we got accepted, uh we traveled through a plane.
Mm.
So I remember what it was we we weren't provided the plane though, so we had to get our own plane to go there to submit the last stuff we needed. So we got there, went to DC, went to the main immigration customs, and when we got accepted, that's when we found out where we were going to go live.
Oh,
The area that was provided, and that area in Nebraska is where I've been living since. So it was actually to be honest, as long lasting as it was a Hazara we worked for, it was a very simple process. Filled out a few government paperworks, went to the area, submitted those paperworks, got accepted on everything, got everything checked, background checks, stuff like that, and then said, okay, this is where you're going. There is a home for you over there. Stay there for this long, and we'll see how it goes from there. Because it was a temporary visa, so
all
it
right. So
wasn't.
and then you had to
We
like keep
yeah
filling in
we
stuff out.
got we got our permanent visas, so we don't have to worry about, hey, you have to go back, you know, things of that nature, and yeah, I mean that's it. Like uh, it's hard to it's hard to like encapsulate how even though the process was simple, we had to go through a lot to get to those points. You know what I mean? And we also faced a lot when we were in those points. But yeah, that's in a nutshell. That's what it was. Fill out some paperwork, get accepted, go there. I'm sure a lot of other immigrants can relate to that process, but not the. But they also relate to the actual struggle of getting through that process.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine anyone who's done paperwork knows that it can be it can be hard to encapsulate just how much of a like a process it can be through.
Yeah,
And I imagine gathering information, getting stuff
you
prepared
know,
must have been hard.
and also trying to live our life at New Delhi at the same time.
Mm.
So trying to pay the bills. To collect money. Go to school, things of that nature at the same time.
So you were actually in an Indian school at that
Yeah,
time? Yeah. So is that like an Indian? I guess I just we'll leave that for now. There's a lot of things we're not going to get into everything. So,
yeah,
but so yeah, that's interesting, especially because I don't know about others, but personally, when I hear refugee, I always think, oh, that must be the asylum process. But like, there's
yeah,
others. Obviously, you came in through a
yeah,
political visa. You weren't. You again. That's another thing of like
yeah.
images. Not every refugee are those images we see of people coming over by boats onto the coasts of Europe. Everyone's experience is different, and we
Mhm,
can't dismiss that diversity.
mhm.
Yeah, that's so again, that's absolutely very, very
Yeah.
interesting. I guess so for one last I think we'll do one last thing and then we might wrap this up. And so I
Okay.
wanted to
Very. Yeah.
this is the sort of this might be the most complex thing to talk
Mhm.
about. And so if
Yeah.
you ever like say I can't answer that, I don't want to answer that,
Yeah.
completely fine.
Understood. Understood.
So previously you've talked about how you have met people who are now part of the Taliban who have become terrorists. You
Yeah.
have friends who have become part of these
Yeah.
organizations.
Sadly, well, not I'm not with them anymore. Of course, I'm not their friends, or I'm not people they're affiliated with. That's not. I just want to like get that out the way. That I'm not trying to defend the Taliban in any way, shape, or form.
No, obviously.
Yeah.
But I guess I'd like to, hmm. I'm just, it's a very distinctive thing because
Yeah.
for most Americans, if they found out that they were friends with someone who was even like if most
For example,
Americans,
far
yeah,
right, for example.
they'd be, that's hard for a lot of people to comprehend. But
Mm-hmm.
so for I suppose
Yeah.
I'm interested in what that experience was like. Like
Mm-hmm.
what was it like sort of realizing
Yeah.
that people
Yeah.
are terrorists, to use
Yeah.
the sort of colored
I mean, yeah.
terminology.
I mean, that's what they are, you know. I guess one thing is that you know, for me personally, I don't want to say that I support them, but I understand, you know. The conditions we grew up, this is one thing I want people to know, you know, the conditions we grew up in, the things we've seen, you know, I'm not surprised. The environment that was created for us makes becoming a radicalist so easy politically, belief wise. But you also have the means to become a radicalist at your disposal. That's the big thing. I mean, I remember there were, you know, members of the Taliban just walking around, you know, recruiting kids right there, paperwork, you know, like it's a job application, you know what I mean? Like, hey, you know, you want to come fight with us? You know, you'll get some money, you know, you'll get all these girls, you know what I mean? Like, so when that environment is created, you know, trying to stay straight and trying to stay in the right route is, you know, difficult. But another thing is that beyond the Taliban, you know, that environment also makes, you know, someone taking a different route that's also wrong too. You know, like I know kids, you know, they were, you know, dealing drugs, you know, like I know kids that were, you know, trying to traffic guns, you know, and not my friends, of course, but like, you know, I just when you're around those people and you see that and it becomes a normal thing, you know, it creates a domino effect. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
it becomes
Yeah,
you become
yeah,
desensitized to it as
yeah,
well.
exactly. And you create this belief of I have to do whatever I need to do to survive. So if that means hurting someone or, you know, ruining my own life, then I'll do it. And you know, to be honest, I see an American too with a lot of the you know, youths around my area. You know, I try to tell them to stay straight. You know, but it's hard. You know, like you know what I mean, like when that's all you see, you know, when all you see is people dealing drugs, when all you see is, you know, people killing each other over senseless things, you know, like that makes you want to chase that path because you feel trapped. You know what I mean? Like you feel I have no other option. I gotta get out no matter what I do, you know. And when it comes to the you know, when it comes to like actually knowing that people are in this, you know, it breaks my heart because every time I think of what could have been, you know, like I just think about had they had the opportunities they would have in America, you know, maybe they could have been a surgeon, you know, maybe
Mm.
they could have been a school teacher, you know, maybe they could have been, you know, maybe they could have been, you know, maybe they could have just worked in a grocery store, who knows, but you know, but they don't, you know, when you don't have that you know, you just think about like how this was the cards they were dealt, you know. I could sit here and say, um you know, I could sit here and say, you know, it's been easy for me to try to keep staying a straight route, you know. Like right now I'm doing good, you know, I'm doing good. I got school, you know, I got a job, you know. I could lie and say it's easy, but it's not, you know what I mean? Like I know for a fact I've done things that I regret, you know, out of, you know, desperation for money, you know. Nothing crazy, you know, like nothing wild, you know, not throw me in prison, but you know, things I regret, you know what I mean? Cuz like cuz that's the options you're left with. So of course I despise it, but I also, you know, I understand and I feel love for them because, you know, that's one thing I hope that people know is I don't have hate in my heart for anyone, you know, like it's easy for me like to sit down here and say the conditions I grew up in, the things that I've lived through, that I could hate the world, you know, I could be like I could blame everyone for everything. I could, you know, I could look at all the Americans and say, look at what you guys did to me. I could look at all the Afghans. I say, look what you guys did to me. But that's just, you know, not the kind of person I am and not the kind of person I want to be, you know. All I see is the same. I hope this doesn't come off wrong, but the same empathy I feel for an American soldier who shot a child because he's scared is the same empathy I feel for a member of the Taliban who saw a civilian get shot and turned radical. Does that make sense? Like
Uh,
all I have in my heart is just, you know, empathy. I understand, you know, I understand why, you know, these people do the things they do. And I don't say that as an excuse or to justify their actions. I say that because, you know, uh, some it's hard. When your environment is like this, it's hard. I don't want, I wish people wouldn't turn to that route, where they do these things, where, dealing drugs, killing, robbing, but all that hope doesn't matter if that environment is still there. So I like to remember, instead of questioning why did they do this, I like to question how did we as humans, not just I don't not Afghans, not Americans, not Europeans, Indians, nothing like that. Like how did we as humans let our world get to this point, where someone feels like they have to where a soldier feels like they have to kill an Afghan child or he'll grow up to be a terrorist, where a terrorist has to shoot a civilian because he feels like as our soldier or a civilian because he feels like they're going to come after him. How do we get to this point? That's what I like to say. So I do feel empathy, for all those people. Like no matter what they've done. And I know that sounds like corny. I get that, but it's like at the same time, what good is me sitting here and hating everything about it? What good is that going to do me when I could instead try to change things in my own ways, or change the world in my own ways, try to set someone to the straight path. That's why in my career I want to get into a career that like where I can help people one to one. I think that outside of Afghanistan the world has a lot of issues. Everywhere has issues, but in an Afghan context, I do understand because I just, like a lot of people ask me, uh, if I hate the Taliban, it's like I hate the things they do, but I can't hate someone who, saw destruction or saw the horrors of war and turned to a wrong path because I know that means that someone else failed them. We as a society, we failed them because no one woke up and said, I hate Americans. No one woke up and said, I'm going to deal drugs. It's a step by step process, so, I'm kind of rambling on, but I mean, my main point is, when it comes to how I feel, it's, I feel sadness for what could have been, but I also, I feel empathy and I understand, how it got to that point, you know. But at the same time, I think it's better to. I think when it comes to focusing on these issues, I think it's better to look at the bigger picture rather than why did this person do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of my personal philosophy on it or how I feel about it.
And I just got to say, like, the anybody can say like I don't want to hate someone,
Yeah,
like, but the strength it takes, because you're not just like some person who's never had to deal with that. Like
yeah,
you've seen this stuff
mm,
first person. The fact that you
yeah.
still have that strength to say no, I'm not going to hate someone is that's impressive. That
Hmm.
is real strength.
Thank
So
you. Appreciate that.
seriously, that's some people don't have that strength, and so
Mm,
that's very impressive. And I think I'd say a lot of people can learn from that philosophy.
mm,
Um, you know, I could keep going for. I think we could keep going for hours,
yeah.
but we've been talking for.
And we hit a lot of good
Yeah,
points too.
we've been talking for 2 hours now, so I think I'm going to say we'll at least. I'm going to say we're going to call it here. So,
Okay.
everyone at home, it's kind of weird to talk to people who aren't there, but everyone at home, uh, this is Alex from Afghanistan, a fun name. And I just want to. I hope everyone can say this, and I say this. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
of
this.
course.
It's
And
been
thank you for letting me share my perspectives and ideas on this. I like having the opportunity, to maybe teach someone, something they didn't know or maybe fill their curiosity a little bit.
and just to close this off. You don't like I don't think you really want people to be like going and following you, hunting you down on the internet.
No,
So
I'm good. I
we'll
want to
not.
stay I want to stay anonymous, to be honest with you.
That's fine. That no, that obviously makes sense. I'm just,
Yep.
but like obviously like I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in your perspective and your
Hmm.
ideas. So if you had any like closing statement, like
Yeah.
final thing you
Yeah.
wanna sign off on.
Yeah. Final thing I want to say you know, I know it sounds stupid, but get to know people. Don't depend on, the news or social media or, stereotypes to learn about someone. Just talk to them, go up to them, ask them, like, say hi to them, like that kind of thing. That's how we learn more about people from different groups or just in general, like different backgrounds, not even beyond ethnicity, just people learning about people in general. That's how you do it. You just have an honest conversation with them, like the one I'm having right now. That is how we learn about people, not through media or through stereotypes. Of course they're good at drawing a general picture, but that's all it is, a general picture. The more you interact with the people around you, not only will you get more opportunities to create friends and be happier, but you create more opportunities to get accurate and honest information that relates to what you want to know. Just so you know researching on the internet is easy, and I know talking to someone face to face is hard, especially if you don't know them, but it's more beneficial, and it's more respectful to everyone, including yourself. I mean, that's something even I struggle with sometimes, but I try to talk to people, I try to learn more about their perspectives, and I've never regretted. There's never been one day where I regretted. Even I've talked to people who, have been racist and hated my guts, you know what I mean? But I still never regret it because the information you learn and the things you learn about people, it's priceless, and you can't just look that up on Google. That's something you got to experience. So that's the only thing I got to say, have more conversations like this one. Of
Yeah. Thank you so much.
course. Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating to talk to. Thank you, Alex.